Hey, it's Amy Newmark. I'm off this week for a writing retreat because I have to work on my book, Chicken Soup for the Soul, Maverick with a Mission. It's coming out in October, and I have to write it. I hope you enjoy this week's episodes. What we're doing is rerunning the very first week of the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast. Chances are you haven't heard these episodes before, and I think you'll enjoy them.
Changing your life one story at a time. This is the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast with Editor-in-Chief Amy Newmark.
Hey, it's Amy Newmark. I'm here with your daily dose of Chicken Soup for the Soul inspiration. This is my first podcast, so I'm a little nervous about it. And you're one of my first listeners, so thank you for being here. I hope you stay with me for the whole 5 minutes. This daily podcast is going to be my way of sharing everything that I've learned as author, editor-in-chief, and publisher of Chicken Soup for the Soul, which is a job I've been doing for the last 8 years and about 12,000 stories. These stories have changed my own life, and I think they can change yours too. After all, isn't storytelling the way that mankind has always passed on wisdom and culture and advice, right? Even back in the old campfire days, that's how it worked. Storytelling helps to bring lessons to life for us. And that's why we do what we do at Chicken Soup for the Soul. We publish books that are filled with real-life stories from real people. These are ordinary people who have had extraordinary experiences. And it's those extraordinary experiences that we turn into Chicken Soup for the Soul stories that we share with you. They're all true stories, and that's why they have such an impact on me. I get to know the writers of these stories. I feel like I have 5,500 really good friends out there who I've met over the last 8 years. Because the stories are true, they have a real impact on me, and I think they're going to have a real impact on you. So let's dive right in. I'm going to share my first story with you on my very first podcast, and it's still pretty much the beginning of the new year, so I think we can still talk resolutions with each other. And I want to start with a really important lesson that I've learned from our stories. And if you're like me and you're one of those type A perfectionists striving for excellence kind of people, then you need this lesson the way that I need this lesson. And the lesson is be kind to yourself. Be less of a perfectionist. Be less judgmental about your own weaknesses and your own performance. Stop listening to that negative voice that's inside your own head. That's probably the most negative voice you ever hear every day, is the one inside your own head. I know I did a radio show a week ago and I thought I was terrible. And then I went and listened to it yesterday and I said, oh my gosh, I was really good. I mean, these things happen. Your biggest critic is yourself. So cut that out. And I'm going to try to help you get there today with the story I'm going to tell you. Because if you're like me, you sometimes wonder when the rest of the world will realize that you don't know what you're doing. Like me doing this podcast. I think it happens to everyone on occasion. We're perfectly qualified to do whatever we're doing, and we don't think that we are. I'm amazed at the number of successful people who confess to being insecure. They don't think they're good enough to do what they're already doing really well. And when that problem becomes extreme, psychologists call it imposter syndrome. I think if you think about times in your life when you have felt insecure, you'll realize you almost felt like you were an imposter in your own job or in your own home or in your own volunteer activity. Whatever you were doing, you thought, I'm an imposter here. I shouldn't be here. And I remember a very vivid example of this from my own life. It happened more than 20 years ago when my kids were just toddlers. My husband was away on a business trip, and I was taking the kids home from a barbecue at a neighbor's house, and they looked up at me with those open little 2-year-old and 4-year-old faces, and they looked like they thought that I was in charge of the world. And I thought to myself, I'm in my early 30s, I'm barely out of college, and these people think that I know what I'm doing. I'm just going to have to pretend. And that's what I did for the rest of the day. I pretended through bath time and dinner time and bedtime. And somehow they survived, and they're 27 and 29 today, and they'll probably go through the same thing when they're parents. But I think most of us are afflicted at times by a bit of self-doubt. So the story I told you I was going to tell you, it's by Sarah Matson, and it's in our book called Chicken Soup for the Soul, The Power of Positive. The story is called Battling My Inner Bully. And in it, Sarah describes how even in grade school, her inner bully was so much worse than any bully she ever encountered in class. She says, and I'm quoting her now, "I grew up lacking self-confidence. Even though outwardly I was a high achiever, I excelled at school, earned a full scholarship to college, graduated magna cum laude, but I couldn't fully enjoy those accomplishments because always underneath was the feeling that I wasn't good enough." So it took an autoimmune disease to cure Sarah of this lack of self-confidence. She was explaining to a health counselor that her white blood cells were attacking her own body, and Sarah had an epiphany. She said, "That's funny. I just realized that's what I do. I attack my own self." And that insight changed Sarah. So on her 40th birthday, she wrote in her journal, "This year, I want to be kind to myself." She says it's been hard work, but she's learned to talk back to that negative inner voice in her head. There's an author named Sally Kempton who has a great quote about this. She says, "It's hard to fight an enemy who has outposts in your head." I think that we can all learn from Sarah's lesson, and we can call off the attack by that enemy, that negative voice that has an outpost in our heads. We can take charge of our own inner voices. So that's it. That's our first shared lesson. Be kind to yourself. The next time we get together, we're going to talk about something else you can do, a super easy way to change your life for the better. It's a change that you can literally make in 1 second. And by the way, being an editor, I don't use the word literally unless I really mean it. I'm Amy Newmark, and I want to thank you for listening to my very first Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast. If you'd like to read more stories and tips from the book that I mentioned, Chicken Soup for the Soul, The Power of Positive, then go to our website, chickensoup.com.